He was basically a British prisoner of war on board a British warship on September 13th when the British began to bombard Fort McHenry. And overnight, Fort McHenry and the man aboard that British warship would become almost instantaneously famous. I'm at Fort McHenry outside of Baltimore, and it was here on September 13th and September 14th of 1814 that this fort became the last and really the only line of defense to protect Baltimore, the third largest city in America. And the gentleman I speak about is Francis Scott Key, who on the morning of September 14th, straining to see if the American flag was still flying above the fort, and when he saw the stars and stripes flying, he began to write a poem that would later be set to a British beer drinking song, and that in 1931 would become our national anthem. But today, Fort McHenry is back in the news, but not for good reason, because the man I'm speaking about, Francis Scott Key, is under attack for, well, doing something perfectly legal at the time, that of owning slaves. Stick around for this episode, because I want to talk about Fort McHenry during the American Civil War, and I want to talk about what's happening to Francis Scott Key. And we're also going to see if I can get my 48-star cloth flag with the stars sewn onto it sent up the flagpole here at Fort McHenry. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And as I mentioned, today we are at Fort McHenry here in Baltimore Harbor, and we're going to discuss, well, two things. One is the role that Fort McHenry played during the American Civil War, and secondly, how the man who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem, when he was on a British warship out in the harbor on the morning of September 14th, how he is under attack for, of all things, doing what was legal at the time, owning slaves. So, let's start off with talking about Fort McHenry during the Civil War, and then we'll talk about Francis Scott Key. Please stick around to the end, because I'm going to also update you on some other issues regarding monuments and name changing and things like that at the end. And also we're going to see if we can't get this 48-star flag run up the flagpole here at Fort McHenry. Okay, here we are at Fort McHenry. Let's go through the sally port and enter the inner fort. We'll take a little look around. Going through the sally port. Meet you on the other side. Okay, just came through the sally port here. They're getting ready to raise somebody's flag. Is that a 50-star flag? Is that 50? Yeah. All right. Let's see if they'll do my 48-star flag in a little bit. While we're waiting for that to go up, let's just take a look here. The fort itself, the inner fort, is not very big, but at the time of the battle during the War of 1812, there was about 1,000 soldiers and officers here, both, I guess, in the inner and outer fort. So, let's see them raise this young man's 50-star flag up. We'll see if they're going to do my 48 later. Okay, let's see if it'll go up. So now they're hooking the flag up to the ropes.
Anybody wants to see Star-Spangled Banner while we do this, you're free. Go ahead.
Okay, getting ready to raise the flag. See if they'll do my 48-star flag next. Okay, there she goes. And the great thing is you, the owner of the flag, you get to raise it. flagpole.
Go ahead, keep going.
About halfway there right now.
Go ahead, go until you'll hear a little click.
90-foot flagpole. They just said 90 feet in the air. Okay, they don't leave it up very long. So as you can see, the land that Fort McHenry is on is really at the tip of a peninsula, and on September 13th, British warships that were stationed out in front of you here began attacking Fort McHenry. They needed to silence Fort McHenry in an effort to capture Baltimore, which, as I mentioned, was the third largest port city in America at the time, and the battle continued through the day into the night of September 13th in a heavy rainstorm. And on the morning of September 14th, it was misty, it was foggy. Francis Scott Key was out on one of the British warships out there in the harbor, and he really strained to see what flag, if at all, was flying above Fort McHenry. Would it be an American flag? Would it be no flag, meaning the Americans had abandoned the fort? Or would it be a British flag? And when he looked through his glasses, he saw a huge, huge flag flying. The commander of Fort McHenry at the time was Major George Armistead. His descendant would fight at the Battle of Gettysburg and be mortally wounded on July 3rd. I'm speaking, of course, of General Armistead of Pickett's division. And it was Major Armistead here at Fort McHenry that ordered the huge garrison flag be raised, as I mentioned. And as I used to tell my students when I was teaching this in college, that was really the Americans' way of saying, well, basically giving the British a big middle finger. And Francis Scott Key was so moved by seeing that flag go up that flagpole, he began to pen the words that would eventually become our national anthem. And in 1931, the Star Spangled Banner officially became the United States national anthem. Monument for Major George Armistead, who was the overall American commander here at Fort McHenry during the battle, during the War of 1812. The inscription reads, to Colonel. He was promoted after the battle, but at the time of the battle he was a major. To Colonel George Armistead, April 10th, 1779 to April 25th, 1818. Commander of this fort during the bombardment by the British fleet, September 13th through 14th, 1814, War of 1812. Before we go too far into this video, I got to apologize. My voice is off. Caught yet another one of these winter colds like I did last year, and it's a lot better than it was on Christmas Day, I'll tell you that much. So the great thing about Fort McHenry, if you want to pay a visit here, the great thing is children 15 and under are free, 16 and over are considered adults, and it's $15 to get in, but you get to come in and see the barracks, It's very hands-on here, and one of the barracks I'm in talks about Fort McHenry during the Civil War. Again, we're in Baltimore. I'll probably be doing an episode some point down the road on the Baltimore riots, but we have a picture here depicting the riots, and this all happened shortly after the war started. And it mentions here that on April 22nd, President Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and Fort McHenry itself became a prison camp for prisoners of state, for people who were outspoken against the Union and showed pro-Southern sympathies. In fact, one of Francis Scott Key's descendants was actually held here at Fort McHenry because he owned a newspaper and was extremely pro-Southern. So there is some Civil War history here at Fort McHenry. And I do advise people, if you're in Maryland or you're planning a trip to visit some Civil War sites in Maryland, put Fort McHenry on your list of things to do. So according to the volunteers and the rangers that are here at Fort McHenry, the fort itself was used only to house what they called prisoners of state, as I mentioned. And those, again, were people that were anti-Union or spoke out in favor of being pro-Southern. Now, I was told that behind me, at what is the visitor center there, that is where Confederate prisoners of war were kept. Not exactly sure why the decision was made to put civilians inside the fort and keep prisoners of war outside the fort, but that is what happened during the American Civil War. The Confederates were kept outside of the fort, while political prisoners, for lack of a better term, were kept inside the fort. All right, so how did we get to 1814 and the Star-Spangled Banner? Well, we declared war on England in 1812, and well, things didn't go good from the start. We tried invading Canada, and that was a dismal failure. England at the time was a little busy fighting Napoleon, but in the spring of 1814, Napoleon surrenders, and now the British can turn all of their attention on the United States, and it becomes really a second struggle for the United States to even stay alive as a nation. And 1814 was a horrible year for the United States. Prior to the attack here at Fort McHenry, the British invaded Washington, D.C. They burned our capital, and then they turned their sights here to Baltimore because, as I mentioned, this is the third largest city in the United States at the time, and it was a major exporting, importing hub. And so the British Army tries to take Baltimore by land, and the British fleet sails up the Chesapeake and into Baltimore Harbor here in an effort to try to capture Baltimore for the British. So on the morning of September 14th, 1814, Francis Scott Key is out in the harbor on board a British warship. He sees the huge garrison flag going up, which, by the way, the dimensions of that flag were 30 by 42. 30 feet by 42 feet. This thing is huge. That's why I said, when I told my class when I was teaching it, this was the Americans' way of just giving the giant middle finger to the British. Haha, we're still here. Francis Scott Key is so moved, he starts putting his thoughts on paper, and he writes a poem. It becomes our national anthem, 117 years later. It's still our national anthem. Talk about that in a minute. And he is almost overnight, he becomes a national hero. But that was 1814. We're in the 21st century now. And unfortunately, we're losing our American heroes. People that were heroes for decades, if centuries, if not longer, are becoming villains. And Francis Scott Key is currently on the villain list. The woke agenda has put Francis Scott Key in their crosshairs. The man who gave us our national anthem is under attack. Why? Because in 1814, he was doing something that was perfectly legal. He owned slaves. Yes, you know, People, and I was just talking to somebody here who thinks I'm probably a little crazy and use the terms, well, time marches on. Yes, time does march on, but we don't forget our past. Do we want slavery to come back? I certainly don't. Okay? And so there was a school in Montgomery County, Maryland, Francis Scott Key Middle School. They are strongly considering renaming the school because Francis Scott Key did a legal thing at the time and he owned slaves. Folks, listen to me. I didn't think I'd be ever saying these words, but listen to me, because I think I'm right. I think I'm hitting the nail on the head. The woke agenda apparently is anybody who owns slaves is now an enemy of American history. They started with easy targets, Confederates. Okay, they were traitors to the United States Constitution and they were promoting slavery. But earlier this year, I did an episode up in Albany where I talked about one of Washington's generals. His monument had to come down in Albany because he was a slaveholder. Now we're seeing it with Francis Scott Key. And here is one of the great things about coming to Fort McHenry. You can bring your own American flag. They will run it up the very flagpole that the big garrison flag was run up on the morning of September 14th, 1814. The very flagpole that had the flag that Francis Scott Key saw. Okay, folks, I don't know if you can see it, but it's up there next to the big garrison flag. Yeah, can we bring her down just a little bit? Just bring her below. And folks, anybody could bring their American flags here. This is a 48-star flag. Sorry you can't bring foreign flags or Confederate flags, but there's my 48-star flying right below that bigger 15-star American flag. 15-star flag is what would have been flying here at the fort the day of the battle. If the name Francis Scott Key is ringing a bell to any of my fellow Civil War historians out there, that's because it was his descendant, Philip Barton Key, who was murdered by then Congressman, future Civil War General Dan Sickles in front of the White House in the 1850s because, well, Barton Key was having an affair with Sickles' wife, Teresa. Well, before I end this episode, and I hope you enjoyed our little trip around Fort McHenry here. Again, it didn't play a major role during the American Civil War, but it did see prisoners of war and prisoners of state. I just want to end by updating you on a few things we've discussed in the past. There was an article that appeared in the USA Today online on December 6th of 2023, and the headline read, "A Country's Monument Tells Its Stories. A $500 million donation could diversify that history." And it talked about various monuments that the government is planning to erect in celebration of American history, and this article seem to kind of bash the current monument system, saying it's dedicated mostly to white men and war. Well, our nation is proud of the battles we fought in an effort to keep the United States the United States. But let me just go down this list here. There's a monument that's going to be dedicated in Chicago and Tallahatchie, Mississippi, to honor Emmett Till. Till was 14 years old when he was lynched and mutilated in Chicago in 1955. His open casket funeral helped launch the Civil Rights Movement. Okay, that's great. I mean, that's a piece of American history that should not be lost and should be told. Again, if you ever noticed with all of my episodes when I start talking about stuff like this, I'm always encouraging the woke agenda to stop destroying Civil War monuments and start creating Civil War monuments. I'm still waiting for somebody to take me up on my challenge to erect a monument in or near Gettysburg in memory of the blacks that were impressed back into slavery, or in some cases into slavery for the first time when the Confederate Army invaded Pennsylvania. Nobody has taken me up on that offer yet. In Memphis, a monument to listening is being installed to Tom Lee, who was a 39-year-old black laborer in the city when in 1925 a steamboat capsized on the Mississippi River and he helped save 32 people from drowning. Okay, so that's what some of this $500 million is going to. And in Washington, D.C., the Bureau of Indian Affairs are collecting oral histories of survivors of the federal Indian boarding school system. That was an attempt in the late 1800s into the early 1900s to take young Indians off the reservations and bring them east and try to make them look more European, both in the way they wear their hair and the style of dress, and an effort to try to Europeanize, Americanize them. It was a, in my opinion, a really dumb thing to do. Just let people be people. Let them be themselves. Okay? So again, there's a $500 million donation to erect monuments, to do these types of things to help keep history alive. And that is great. The problem is that these folks can't seem to realize that, you know what, we can do these things and not destroy what we currently have. We can do these things without taking down monuments to Confederates. We could do these things without taking monuments down to generals of the American Revolutionary War. We can do these things without renaming schools. Okay, we can do both. But that seems to be over the heads of the people in charge today. That does not seem to comprehend in the gray matter, if they have any, between the ears. I said I wanted to give you an update on some other things, and that is Arlington National Cemetery. In December of 2023, there was a judge who actually did order a temporary stay on the removal of the Confederate Monument in Section 16 of Arlington National Cemetery. That same judge reversed his decision about 3 days later, and that monument in Arlington National Cemetery is slated to come down at the beginning of 2024, if removal has not already started at the time of this filming. For all those who helped try to save that monument, I say thank you. If you were like me, if you wrote to Arlington National Cemetery, if you wrote to the Department of Defense, if you contacted your congressmen and your senators, thank you. I am from Pennsylvania, originally from New York, and I'm sure that those efforts fell on deaf ears. And what can I say? History repeats itself. It appears that in the 21st century, much like the 1850s, contacting your congressman, your senator from the North with concerns about listening to the South and honoring what is their history is falling on deaf ears. A few months ago, I was standing here in front of the Florida Monument when I started to tell you about what was happening in Florida to Confederate monuments down there, and I do have an update, unfortunately. Also, today, December 28th, it was reported that Mayor Donna Deegan of Jacksonville, Florida, kept her promise, and the monument for Confederate widows and orphans was removed from that city today. What can I tell you? I think I already mentioned she's in that episode that she's very progressive, incredibly woke, and she has a war chest of $500,000 to remove the Confederacy from Jacksonville, and apparently she's going to spend every penny of it. As I mentioned in that episode a few months ago, I did contact Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' office for comment, and I am still waiting for a comment from that office in regard to what is going on in Florida, particularly Jacksonville, with Confederate monuments. So it appears that Governor DeSantis does not want to touch this hot button issue of Confederate monuments, and in my opinion, I don't think he's going to. He's running for president and probably feels that trying to protect American history, even if it's Confederate history, is something that his office doesn't want to touch. But I'm very saddened to report that that monument to widows and orphans was removed from Jacksonville, Florida today. Pretty sad when we can't even have a monument in this country to widows and orphans. Well, this may not be the last episode I film in year 2023. It probably will be the last episode I post this year. I want to take this time now to thank you, my audience, my subscribers, and anybody who's viewed this channel over 2023. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me, especially every time I see that subscriber count go up. It really does make me feel good. I guess could say this year could have been a much better year. As I mentioned in the second part of my episode from Grant's Cottage, I've been battling cancer for almost 2 years now. And it was at the end of 2021, towards the end, that I made a New Year's resolution to get a routine annual physical at the start of 2022. And I'm glad I did, because it turned out I had prostate cancer. It was caught in the early stages, which was great. Although I have to say, if this is what battling stage 1 cancer is like, my heart really does go out for people who are battling stage 3 and stage 4. I got about another 17 months of treatment to go through. I should be done with my last treatment in May of 2025, and I'm really looking forward to that. So please make getting a routine physical part of your New Year's resolutions. It really could be the difference between literally life and death. What can I say? Battling it is a daily chore for me. I get tired easily, I run out of energy, and I don't have the physical strength that I had 2 years ago. But hopefully within the next 17 or so months, that will start to turn around for me. Part of the reason why the number of episodes has been rather slim over the last couple of months was I had a really bad reaction to my treatment in August of this year. And it's been rather rough since then, but there's been a lot of good in 2023. But looking back, I'm really looking forward to what lies ahead and put some of the bad of 2023 behind me. Where I'm at right now, I'm on the Gettysburg battlefield, kind of like my home away from home. Off in the distance there is the South Carolina State Monument, the Georgia State Monument, and one of the towers here on West Confederate Avenue. I do want to thank you all for tuning in, watching this channel. It's kind of ending on a sad note, what's going to be happening or may have already happened at Arlington National Cemetery, what has happened down in Jacksonville, Florida. But the war's not over yet. I mean, there's still plenty of monuments out there that need our protection, because this is American history. Whether you like it or not, this is American history. I think it's great that there's going to be other monuments going up to other time periods, telling other aspects of American history. I think that's great, really is. But we should not sacrifice one for the other. We can have both. We really can. And it's up to us, the American people, we the people, to make sure that our history remains intact and stays that way, because it's ours. It's not the government's, it's ours. And if we have to start voting these people out of office, then that's what we need to do to preserve our history. Because once it's lost, I'm afraid we might start repeating it. Folks, not sure if I should say this or not, but maybe we should all come and visit this monument before the woke agenda takes over and it is removed. Because I'm sure at some point, either he or somebody in his family owned slaves. Folks, I'm filming this on December 28th, 2023. I want to give a shout out to my friend Dawn. Happy birthday. Also, believe it or not, this is the anniversary of Woodrow Wilson's birthday. He was the first Democrat, president from the South after the Civil War. He's not one of my more favorite presidents, but nevertheless, today is the anniversary of his birth, and he was a Southerner. Perhaps if he was president today, he would not be allowing what is going to happen in Arlington National Cemetery to take place. Folks, let's hope 2024 is a better year, both for the world and for American history. So this may be the last episode I post in 2023, so I want to wish you all a Happy New Year. And until next year, for Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. Thank you for watching. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.